The HOA president and board will never be the same after they get exposed for what they do in this story. Get ready, it's a wild ride. I bought my home in 2001 in a 42-home community. We bought right after 9/11, and we picked the community because the HOA fees were very low at just $51. It wasn't long after that we bought the home in the community. We got a sweet deal because of this, and the business had really slowed after 9/11 before those dues started going up. I was 22 at the time. Looking into the financial reports and into the meetings, it became very clear why the dues were going up. The board was a little fiefdom set up by the developers of the homes. Our management company was a subsidiary corporation of the home builder, and the board members were a combination of one of the home developers and two of the very first home purchasers in the community, a 3-person board. The first action the board took with that increase in funds was to remove trees that were not even on the HOA's property. They were trees that sat in an area that the HOA had access to for weed abatement. These trees' real crime was not that they were weeds, it was that they blocked the nice view of the board's president and vice president. At the same time, the bullcrap violation letters started going out to about half of the homes. You aren't mowing enough. You aren't watering enough. Every petty thing that you can think of, they were issuing warning letters and starting to fine homeowners. Cue revenge time after getting one of those letters myself about weed abatement. Ironically, it was researching the community's CC&Rs about weed abatement that led me to realize the trees that were cut were not on HOA property, and it was researching the annual budget that led me to finding out the huge weed abatement expense that was actually the community's funds being spent to remove trees solely for the 2 board members' homeowners' views. I then found out that in California, all anyone needs to initiate a recall of the entire board and install a new one, if successful, was the signatures of 5% of the homeowners delivered to the current board. That's a total of 3 houses in a 42-home community. The board was issued a recall notice not 48 hours after that I'd found out about the law, delivered to the management company in person. Ironically, the home builder's corporate office was in the exact same building as the management company. You think they would have wanted to not make their association so obvious, but hey, it was 2002. This is also when I found out that the management company basically had the entire board in its pocket because they dragged their feet with the recall vote. They set it as far out as they could by law in the middle of the day. Instead of holding it in the community like all board meetings, they set the place at a local park a couple of miles away. They thought they were so brilliant doing this. So, me and my wife put together a proxy voting form for the election, and we went to every door in our community. We told them what was happening with their money, their plans to create an architecture committee that would require all homeowners to get approvals for any additions or changes, and everything. It took us 3 rounds around the neighborhood, plus a couple of extra visits to homes that had not answered initially. In the end, me and my wife had 26 revocable proxies for the election. For those unfamiliar with proxies, it basically gave me and my wife the power to cast that homeowner's vote for them, if and only if they didn't show up to the election. The thoughtless board and management company actually made it easier for us to collect the proxies, because a lot of homeowners flat out could not make the time and place of the meeting. The recall day finally arrives. The current board members are all there, the management company representative is there, and 8 other homeowners showed up to the meeting, 6 of whom we had proxies for and which were revoked by their attendance. They opened the meeting and started saying something about, "Oh, looks like a waste of money, there isn't a quorum, blah blah." I then said, "I'm sorry, but we do have a quorum." They're like, "No you don't, you need 22 homeowners here, and there's only 12. The 3 board members, me and wifey, and the 8 others that showed up. And that's when I pulled out the trump card. I dropped all 26 proxies on the bench table that everyone was sitting at and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but there are more than 30 homeowners present," and then I pointed out the math. After subtracting the 6 homeowners that had showed up, we had 20 additional proxy votes that counted for both quorum and voting purposes. They all got wide-eyed, most especially the management company representative. He came over and looked at the forms very closely and compared it against a list of the homeowners. Even the people that were there and on our side did not realize how much work we had done to ensure the bullcrap ended there and now. The recall meeting was opened. The board members voted not to recall, plus their 3 friends that were on their side. The other homeowners present voted to recall, and the vote stood at 6-6, tied. I then stood and declared that we were voting our 20 valid proxy votes to recall the entire board. Recall passed, 26 votes to 6. The next vote, who replaces the board members? It ended up becoming me and wifey and another homeowner that had voted for the recall and was willing to take the seat. We elected ourselves to the board seats by a vote of 26-6. It was at this point that the management company then stated that Cannon Management was immediately resigning as the management company for the community. I then pulled out the HOA's management contract, which clearly stated that either side needed to give 3 months' notice to effect resignation, and stated that we, the new board, accepted their resignation and set an end date for their services 3 months later. The management guy was nuclear ticked off. I, a 22-year-old kid at the time, had beaten them at their game, and I had prepared for their possible quitting shenanigan. We replaced the management company after a couple of months, having had proper time to find and vet an independent company, at about half the cost, no less. Did the same with the gardening services, which was also a home builder affiliated company, also at about half the cost. The old president of the HOA put his home up for sale about a month later after we rescinded all the old violations and issued a notice to the old board members that we intended to vote on whether they had committed fraud against the association over their weed abatement tree removal action. I still vividly remember walking over to Dale's house, the old president, the day that he was moving and giving him a big wave goodbye as he was getting into the car to follow his moving truck. He gave me the finger as he drove out. Definitely one of the proudest moments in my life. Is this not full HOA takedown? They don't think you're going to do it, but you do your research and you take them out. What would you do? You can't put a lien on your house, not in your community. Posted by Tough Cookie 24/7. So this happened years ago when I was in elementary school, so maybe 15 years ago, and I was living in Florida at the time. Anyone who lives in Florida knows how often new gated communities just pop up. So our neighborhood was established and has been before I even moved into the house. The house once belonged to my uncle. We had a neighborhood watch, but no HOA. The gated community was finally built and the people were moving in. Now, we don't have a bad neighborhood, but we had some strange colored houses, lime green and magenta with giant metal lizards hanging all over it, is an example of one. Our house was simple. Hand brick and half concrete painted white. It stood out compared to some of the other houses. The new gated community is an HOA community. They thought that they ruled over all. Soon, people in our neighborhood were receiving fines for their house color choices, their unsightly cars, not approved mailboxes, and other nitpicky things. My parents received some for my dad's boat being in the driveway, and even our unruly yard. We had a bougainvillea, which is vines, and which grows like crazy, and we were constantly trimming it. And we even got a fine for our fence. The old fence was chain link, and the new fence was a wooden privacy fence. Don't ask why we had 2 different fences. My uncle only fenced in part of the house. It was still good fence, so my dad didn't want to rip it out. Well, my mom and dad would just pitch anything they saw coming from that gated community as they had fancy stationery. This went on for maybe 4 or 5 months. We would receive fines for not meeting HOA standards and other violations. We talked to our neighbors and they received them too. They tried to call and complain but were given the runaround and decided to pitch the mail as well. My mom received a phone call from her bank. They started to question her about the lien on the house that had just appeared in the system. My parents had less than a year left on their payments for the house. They always paid extra every month for the house loan and were always on time. My mom was super confused and said that there shouldn't be a lien. We don't have any reason for there to be a lien. Turns out the gated community filed liens on almost every house in my neighborhood. My mom told the bank the situation and called a lawyer. I'm not sure what all happened, but I know a lot of the members of that HOA faced felony fraud charges, and it was just a huge mess with a pretty big lawsuit against the HOA board. We were able to pay off the house after the lawsuit. We even had a big celebration on one of the roads, a huge cookout, and we met people that we didn't know before. I even made new friends with some kids that I didn't even know existed. People moved out of the gated community due to bad press, and a lot of the houses stood empty for a long time. When I moved away, there were still a lot of houses empty, and it was like a ghost town. Last I heard, the name of the community changed, and the houses were being filled up. So I guess the lesson is, leave our bright houses alone and mind your own business. Nothing like a crooked HOA that tries to break the law get taken down with fraud. Fake HOAs. Okay, so we started renting our current property back in 2014. Our landlord is a close friend and bought this place specifically for us to live in without worry of being homeless. Anyway, we had lived here for almost a year, and then one day we got a letter stating that we were behind on our water payment by so-and-so months and how much we owed. Now, we knew nothing about this, and honestly, I don't think our landlord knew either, because he had several long-term rental housing. So I go and I talk to the water lady, and I apologized about not paying and where I needed to go to send the payment. This is me thinking some kind of water company. She told me to pay it to her with cash or cashier's check. Right off the bat, red flags were going off, but I obliged and I paid. It was only $30 a month. Now, we don't live in an urban area, we are in a rural farm area, and almost everyone on the main street has some kind of livestock, be it horses and cows and so on. Many fields, heck, my own horse is just a quarter-mile down the road from us. Oh, and there's a fully functioning dairy on the next street over, and one of the best breeding facilities in our state on the same main road about 4 miles from us. So, yeah, we're rural. The whole water payment thing I thought was strange. While talking to the water lady, I found out that the properties are on a shared well. Okay, pretty uncommon in this area, but whatever. Oh, and also the water has uranium in it, and we have to use the reverse osmosis system in our house for any drinking and cooking water, which would have been great to know before even considering moving in. We thought that was a basic filtration system to filter the sand from the water, so that was a huge shock. Now that that information was out, we figured, well, if it's to pay for the upkeep of the reverse osmosis systems in the 60-ish houses in the neighborhood and maintain the well, it wasn't a huge impact on our income, so why not? The problem started about a year later. The reverse osmosis system was leaking. Actually, it destroyed the flooring in our kitchen twice, which we had to pay for the repairs to the house that is required to have this system under our sink. Now, this was before I learned about water alarms. I found out about those 2 years later and not from the water board. I had contacted the water lady multiple times to have it fixed, to no avail, and we had to disconnect the filtration system because no matter what we did, it wouldn't stop leaking. Fast forward about 2 years. All of a sudden, people I had never met before were demanding to reinstall the system. But we said no, because we didn't want it to cost more money in damages. The president of the HOA, which was the first time that I'd heard of any HOA since living here, told me that if I didn't let them reinstall the reverse osmosis system in the house, she would make the DEQ force me to install it. So, after that wonderful interaction, I decided to call the DEQ about this situation, and this is when I find out about the water alarm. I told the guy that's in charge of this specific area, and he literally laughed and said, "Miss, I can't force you to do anything, let alone step on the property without your permission." He had told me that other neighbors had told him some suspicious stuff and to contact him if any other problems arise. So, out of sheer curiosity, I decided to look up the so-called HOA. Well, slap me with a fish. Sure as heck, active HOA, but wasn't activated until 2019? The math ain't mathing here. Well, like we done previously, we complied. We let them install the reverse osmosis. The guy actually had to replace it because it was just not usable anymore, and he had asked me when the last time it was serviced was. Well, I told him, it hadn't been serviced since we lived here, and when I tried to get them to come fix it, they wouldn't. And he responded with a, that's odd. Shortly after that, our water lady was taken off the water board because she was unable to do what was needed mentally, and yes, I noticed, and was replaced by the now so-called secretary treasurer. Okay, whatever. Now, about a year after that, we get this notice stating that the water bill was being raised from $30 to $45 a month. Okay, fine. But our reverse osmosis system wasn't being tended to, and we were all told not to tamper with them in any shape or form. So basically, since we got the new reverse osmosis system, they haven't replaced the filters, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, about 3-ish months ago, they held a meeting to vote to raise the water bill again. We were unable to attend the meeting, and also we weren't allowed to vote, but they decided to send us this huge explanation of why it needed to be raised and so on. Many people in the neighborhood were unable to attend because of work or other things, but somehow they got, I think it was a 38-38 vote to raise it. Huh? They raised it from $45 to $60, and now look, I know some of you guys probably pay more than that, but for us, that was a huge increase in such a short time span. So one of our neighbors asked us what we voted, and we told him, well, we weren't allowed to vote, and he asked why, and we told him because we don't own our house. And he said, well, I don't either, but I was able to vote, and I voted no, and so did many other neighbors. That was when things started getting super red flags blaring around. So around July 16th, we got a letter in the mail stating rules, many of which conflict with our state laws. So I decided to look up the state's rules and regulations regarding HOAs. And after doing some digging and finding out that they cannot raise the dues by more than 10% in a year, which they obviously did raise it more than 10%, which led me to somehow look up the HOA itself. There was an original HOA that started in 1981, but it was dissolved and forfeited in 1983, and there was no HOA until October of 2019, and it was administratively dissolved and revoked in 2021. They are still forcing dues using fear tactics to make people comply the works. There are a couple of houses for sale in our neighborhood, and one says no HOA, and the other says HOA fees $30 monthly. I don't know what to do, honestly. This is the first time that I've ever had to deal with an HOA, and obviously they're breaking laws, getting renters kicked out of their houses, just the works, and I feel like it's only a matter of time before we're going to have to move because of the HOA board pestering our landlord. The only reason we complied is to keep peace. But now that we know we're having our money stolen from us for years, it's infuriating. If we could just up and move, we would, but we can't, and we have to deal with these people. Any advice on what to do would be helpful. Also, we have no common areas unless you want to count the area where the water pumps are, which no one but board members and a landscaping company are allowed to go on. That is also the only area that the HOA owns. All the land in the houses are owned by someone. OP and the HOA engineers bring the heat to a Karen in illegal wall building neighbor gets her 7-foot wall torn down and rebuilt, posted by deleted. The next door neighbor and my dad have this old enmity because of a small invisible line between our house and theirs outside in the street, even though any space past the gate or fence is public property. And the neighbors were complaining that our trash bags were getting onto their grass. To define that line, my dad built a small 2-foot concrete wall, kind of like the Great Wall of China or the Berlin Wall. You get the idea. Fast forward a few quiet years later, the neighbor starts building a new wall directly next and against the dining room wall. The entire side stretches about 60 feet long. Over 9 a.m. breakfast, you can hear the guy slapping concrete blocks on the dang thing. And it's pretty terrifying because the wall is years old. I mean, the house is years old too. So it has a fairly nice chance of breaking and falling. Not to mention that the original kitchen and dining room wall is only about 6 feet tall. The neighbor is building a freaking 7-foot wall. Because my dad oversaw the reconstruction of the house, he's also an engineer, by the way, he knows the ups and downs and laws of house construction in our area. But just to be sure, he asked my lawyer godmother for some legal help and the rules from the Homeowners Association HOA engineers as well. So you can't build a wall over 6 feet without a permit, and if you start building over 6 feet, either you've got a hefty fine to pay and get a permit, or it gets knocked down, pay a fine, get a permit, and restart construction. Then he knocks on the neighbor's door and asks about the wall. The guy that comes out is the son, and he's pretty chill to talk to. And then my dad asked, "Is there a permit for building that wall?" This is because you need a permit to build anything over 6 feet tall. Son didn't say anything, but he said he'll ask his mom. Mom comes out wondering what the heck is going on, and my dad politely asked, "What's up with the wall?" Mom says it's fine and dandy until my dad asks Mom if they have a permit for the wall. She says they don't need one. Politely, my dad tells the mom that they need to get a permit for it. Of course, he said he's willing to wait until they get a permit and that this is just a small warning, and he goes on his merry way. He clarifies he only asked if they had a permit. He didn't say anything about what happens if they didn't get a permit and the HOA engineers found out. A month passes and he's back, this time with a recorder. He again asks if they have a permit for the wall, and Mom immediately snaps at him. Obviously, they don't have a permit yet. She cusses at him, screaming for him to get out or she'll sue him for invading the house and her privacy. Well, what can you do but get out if a Karen starts complaining at you? Anyway, my dad reconsults the lawyer and the HOA engineers to make sure that all the information he's got is correct. Oh, and the lawyer told him that swearing or cursing someone can be taken against you, hence the recorder. And he goes back to the neighbor's house 2 weeks later with an HOA engineer. This conversation I heard from inside the house. My dad, speaking normally, couldn't hear, probably asking if they had a permit again. And the mom, "Of course not, we don't need one," as in legit screaming at the top of her lungs. Dad replies, "Then you wouldn't mind if the HOA engineer inspects that wall of yours?" And I was like, oh crap, and me and my mom were giggling inside the house. The HOA engineer confirmed that this was an over 6-foot wall that they were building and that they didn't have a permit. I guess the neighbor thought it was cheaper to knock it down, pay a fine, and have it rebuilt rather than pay the hefty fine. We could hear the wall getting torn down a few weeks later. Or, of course, the HOA engineer said it was the only thing they could do. Oh, the recorder? He didn't even use it anymore. The stupid reconstruction of the wall was enough music for him. Your dad is sick and then he died? Well, you're responsible for the late fee, posted by ProJazz TV Trumpets. To begin, my dad had a trust set up so that if something happens to him or he died, then a trustee can handle his affairs and probate court could be avoided for his stuff after death. However, a trust only grants those permissions once certain criteria are met, such as being incapacitated and of course death. My dad got sick in December, was mentally not there after waking up from an induced coma, and never mentally recovered. During most of this, I was able to handle the basic bills with his debit card and Social Security deposits, but I could not access his savings account where he kept money for things like home and car insurance annual dues and HOA annual dues. Not wanting to rush anything, I did not petition the doctors for a certificate of incapacitation until February. That part was easy. The docs were signed off on almost immediately upon asking. That gave me the ability to contact the attorney who made the trust and activate my power of attorney, guardianship, and accept my role as successor trustee. This obviously gave me access to accounts. It took about 2 weeks for the attorney to record everything with the county, but Dad got sicker in March with an infection he could not fight and was given weeks to live. He passed in April. When you're told that your dad, a man that you love unconditionally, is going to die soon, you put things on hold and spend time with that person, like every waking moment. And I know that the power, the gas, and the water isn't going to get shut off immediately if I'm a few days late. I know the mortgage has a grace period. The car insurance company, read that again, an insurance company, even worked with me on the delayed annual payment and put his account into a monthly status with a payment that reflected the same discount given to people who pay the full year up front. The HOA, however, dues were due in April. I got access to his funds in March, and then I got the news. His neighbors loved my dad. His house was the neighborhood party house. The entire HOA board hung out there. And the HOA, for the most part, is laid back on rules. I told the treasurer that I wasn't paying a dime until he died, And he said, no worries, and he'll waive the late fee because I shouldn't be worrying about bills at a time like that. The HOA president, however, at his deathbed, asked me when I was paying. I said, well, I'll worry about that later. She asked if I didn't have the money personally. Stupidly, I said, I have the money, but I'm spending time with my dad. I'm the only familiar face that he knows right now. Dad passed, and we had the funeral, and I went home for 2 weeks to decompress before managing his affairs and whatnot. I came back to 3 invoices in his mailbox. The first one was just the annual dues, but the next one had a 10% late fee, and the one after that had a 20% late fee in addition to the 10% late fee. I called the treasurer, and he said he was overruled by the president. I called the entire board, and, surprise, the president didn't call back. The board agreed and tried to press her, but she would not budge. During all of this, they added another 10% through the property management company who sends the invoice bypassing the treasurer. The reasoning? There was a responsible agent prior to the due date who could have paid this. I talked to the attorney who very plainly said that the HOA past due fees are magnitudes less than it would cost to fight them. So I freaking paid it with a letter addressed to the board that said, all HOA board members invited to the house for dinner after sale, but before closing, except the HOA president. I had an estate sale and I kicked her out, loudly, by saying, well, look who is here, the lion, the witch, and the audacity of this bee, when she came to look at his stuff. She specifically requested a paperweight that he kept on his desk that had no meaning to anyone but her. When it didn't sell in the estate sale, I listed it on the neighborhood app for $1. Then said it would cost the amount of the late fee when she inquired, took the ad down, and I took it home when she declined to pay almost $500 for it, and it's on my desk now. So yeah, screw HOAs and the jerks that run them. Couldn't have any respect, dignity, or civility over a late fee while someone is dying. Said it before and I'll say it again, money and power corrupts people, and this is absolutely no dignity at a time when you need that dignity the most. Come on, HOA president, you really dropped the ball on this one. A Karen HOA story called Entitled Neighbor from Heck, posted by Gertrude Secret. This is the story of my entitled neighbor, Bob. We live in an HOA, I know, and Bob lives across the green space from us. Bob's entitlement was evident almost from the moment that we moved in. About a month after we moved in, the police, the sheriff, and the DEA came knocking at our door. Bob had called them and told them that we had lawn bags full of cannabis in our garage. It's important to note here that I use medical cannabis. Bob runs the local Narcotics Anonymous group. Well, I gave the cops the grand tour of our home, and there was nothing here at all. They apologized for the intrusion and left. A week later, our landlord called because Bob had called him, saying that we had a grow-op going on here. Our landlord knew he was lying because the landlord had just been here. Bob was trying to get us out of the neighborhood because he can't have that crap in his neighborhood. He gave up on that when my daughter and her husband purchased the property. Then he started with the constant complaints and demands. We weren't allowed to feed the squirrels because it made a mess. We couldn't plant clover because it might get in his yard. We had to mow more frequently because he mows twice a week. We only mowed once and it looked bad. The list goes on and on. He mows the green space between our houses every time he mows his lawn, killing all the wildflowers, and then he tells people that they can't walk there because he mows it so it's his. The worst of his entitled behavior started 2 years ago. He decided he was going to stop using his furnace and burn wood instead. Now, I have lung cancer and my next door neighbor has COPD, so this was really bad. In January 2022, we had a stagnant air warning, which means you can only use wood stoves or fireplaces if that's your only source of heat. Bob didn't care, and the thick smoke from his wood stove blanketed the neighborhood. One morning, I woke up unable to breathe. My daughter called for an ambulance, and I stopped breathing and had to be intubated. I spent 6 days in a medically induced coma and another week in the hospital. My kids tried talking to him, and I tried reasoning with him, but he didn't care. He said he was allowed to heat his house any way he saw fit. We called the county, and they told him his wood stove was outdated and needed to be replaced. He said he would replace it, but 2 years later, it still has not happened. The final straw for me was when another neighbor and I had an argument. It was all of 2 minutes and resolved the next day. He came over screaming at me because he was not putting up with this crap in his neighborhood. Then he screamed at me that it was not fair that I got disability for cancer and he had to work all day. A month later, he was suddenly in too much pain to work. He went on disability from his job, spending his time climbing on his roof, working on his motorcycles, mowing his yard every other day, and generally just enjoying not having to work. Someone he worked with turned him in for fraud, and we had investigators out here taking pictures of his activities around the house. I made sure to have a chat with them myself. Nosy neighbor keeps calling the city and police on me, and now is trying to have my dog taken away. OP gives us updates and more info in the comments. I, 22 female, and my partner, 24 male, purchased our first home January 2022, and we absolutely love the neighborhood and our direct neighbors right next door. We're the youngest couple in the area, with most of the people being older and retired. We also have no kids, only a 2-year-old Siberian Husky who is my baby. The problems began as soon as we moved in, with complaints piling in first about our lawn. The house was abandoned before we purchased it, and then there was a noise complaint about our dog. For a Husky, she barely makes any noise, so I was surprised about the complaint, but I just let it go. About 9 months into living at the home, my partner purchased me an antique car which needed some work done before it could be driven. It was parked far into our long driveway, not yet tagged because we had just purchased it, and one tire was off to be fixed. The very next day, we got a nasty letter on our door from the city about an inoperable vehicle on our property that must be removed. We found this very strange, and after speaking with the inspector, who simply told us to move the car, we found out that there is a person in the neighborhood who keeps reporting us but remains anonymous. I got close with my closest neighbors and tried to ask them for advice on what to do. They both said that the most likely person to be reporting us is the neighbor that's across from us. An old lady and her husband who live with their blinds wide open just looking outside 24/7. Their daughter, a Karen in the making, drives around the neighborhood looking for people to report. My partner and I just happened to become the latest victims, and she apparently really hates us. So I decided to, just be nice to her and kill it with kindness. Oh, big mistake. So about 2 months ago, I fixed up my motorcycle and decided to take it out for a ride to enjoy the warm weather. While it idled in my driveway to warm up while I geared up, I saw the daughter come by with her kid to my neighbors across the street. The child seemed very interested in the bike, so I gave a little wave and I hopped on the machine to ride off. I enjoyed the ride, and when I returned, I parked the bike in the driveway to do some basic maintenance. A police officer then rolled up to my house. He claimed that there was a complaint out about me riding recklessly, doing wheelies and burnouts, and being a danger to the neighborhood. I was completely floored, and I tried to plead my case that I just went for a ride, and I didn't even stay in the neighborhood. He let me off with the warning, and as he drove away, I noticed my neighbor standing in the window, staring at me. From that point on, I decided to mind my own business and not to act friendly to them. Fast forward to this past month. My partner and I had to travel to New York for my family, and we decided to take our dog with us. We had a wonderful time, and when we got back to our home, we only had 4 days to wash clothes and repack before heading off to California for more family time. Within those 4 days, my partner worked days and I worked nights, so our dog was never left alone. Trust me, this becomes important. 3 days ago, I dropped my dog off with a trusted friend whose dog always plays with mine. I paid her $800 to watch my dog at her house for 2 weeks. My home is empty at this point, and I fly to California to enjoy a relaxing vacation. I get video and photo updates of my dog playing and having a blast staying with my friend. This morning, I get a text message from one of my good neighbors saying animal control stopped by my house, and she asked me if my dog was okay. I was extremely confused because I just gotten a photo of my dog cuddled up on my friend's couch. I decided to call the city and see what was up. The city told me that there were multiple reports against me for neglect, abuse, and improper care of my dog, and that a full investigation was going to be conducted against me. I was at a loss for words. I'm across the country right now, and this neighbor has stepped too far now, trying to take my very spoiled and very well cared for dog away from me. All of my friends and my next door neighbors can vouch for just how loved that dog is. So now I'm waiting to hear back from animal control to explain my case. I have no idea what is going to happen next, if they will take my dog or inspect my house or what. I am exhausted, and I'm tired of the harassment by this neighbor. I'm hesitant to get pregnant out of fear that this neighbor would call CPS on me. I feel watched and unwelcome and not quite sure what to do. Any advice from those who have been through something similar is very appreciated. Is there anything legally I can do to make it stop? Comments are saying it's harassment to get a lawyer and also to get cameras, and OP replies, I let them know, being animal control, they are meeting with my friend tonight to see my dog in person. I also gave animal control my vet's contact information. She just had an appointment recently. According to my other neighbors, they've been in this neighborhood for generations, and they do this to everyone. They don't like me because we are a young couple and we bought the house instead of renting. They sent an email and did a phone call to animal control. I'm requesting FOIA to read the email complaint. When I spoke with animal control, they said she claimed my dog was starving and locked inside with no food, water, or bathroom breaks. And yeah, I've reported abused animals in my area before, and they haven't even done a welfare check. I'm just guessing she must have someone that she knows with the city or something. Or it may be for the husky that lives down the street, and I'm the one being blamed? I live in the South, and this other dog that isn't mine is left outside 24/7 with no food or shelter. But yet, my spoiled dog who lives inside and isn't even there right now is being reported. That's crazy. I hope you can take some legal action against these crazy people, OP. My Army shot records aren't good enough? Cool, here's my whole VA file. Alright, fellow appreciators of absurdity and pettiness, here's a satisfying medium-length read to get you that much closer to the weekend as you grind away at the hamster wheel that is the American work week. So, I recently transitioned from active duty Army to the National Guard, which, as my fellow former service members know, comes with a metric buttload of paperwork and medical records. This will be relevant later. So, I got out last December, got accepted to grad school in February, and just started class a few weeks ago. As you all know, there is some sort of pandemic virusy thing going on, and many institutions require a vaccine to attend in-person classes, which the program I am enrolled in falls under. Like a good little boy, I got my vaccine as soon as I could last March, posted the obligatory nobody gives a crap picture of my vaccine card, and then moved on with my life. Fast forward to June, and I am hopping through the endless admin hoops of going back to school, and of course, submitting immunization records is on the to-do list. Since I got my shot through the National Guard, they actually already had the box checked for the pandemic vaccine. Cool. Maybe that's because I am attending a public university in the state I'm in the Guard for, so maybe they share a medical database? I don't know, it doesn't matter. And for those of you who cry HIPAA, newsflash, when you join the military, you give a few things up, get stuff in return, blah blah, that's not what the story is about. Although I don't think that a pandemic shot can do anything to me that anthrax, typhoid, and smallpox shots, 3 pinched nerves, and 5 years of running on pure hate and caffeine hasn't done to me already. But hey, I'm still kicking. On to the malicious compliance part. Now, to submit the rest of my immunization shot records, I have to upload a PDF into the school's medical portal. So, I go through the shot record in my medical outprocessing packet, snip the page so it's just the immunizations, thinking no need to include extraneous military stuff that may confuse them, and hit submit. It's literally just one page. A few days later, lo and behold, I get a notice saying that my medical records are incomplete and incorrect, and action is required on my behalf. I have to upload more info. Okay, will do. I just want to get this done. So, I submit the whole shot record and historical record and testing portion, about 30 pages. Oh, what do you know, deja vu. A few days later, I get an email saying, Dear Mr. Student, this is to inform you that additional action is required. Yeesh. So, I log into the medical portal, because of course this can't be done through email. HIPAA, I know, I just like to complain because we're all human, sue me. And see that whoever reviewed the longer PDF I uploaded wasn't satisfied, saying my submission of proof of immunization was incomplete. Okay, fine. You know what? We'll play that game. I go dig through a closet and find the folder that has my out processing stuff from active duty. The thing is, when you get out, they give you a physical, hard copy of your medical records on CDs in addition to all the digital stuff, as well as what they send to the VA. My medical records were long enough to require 2 CDs. So, copy them all to my laptop and then upload them to the school's medical portal. All 745 pages of CD1 and 300 pages of CD2. Before I hit upload, I respond to the previous message explaining that this is the entirety of my service medical records, and if this isn't sufficient documentation, please let me know. This was in maybe late July, early August. Fast forward to mid-September, and today I received an email confirming the acknowledgement of my proof of vaccination status. Hooray! Solely out of curiosity, I decide to check the documents part. Lo and behold, it's the original one-pager I made. Now, to be fair, I have no idea if someone read through that whole thing or said, screw this guy, and went back to the first one, but either way, due to the 6+ week wait, I like to think some poor sap actually tried to dig through that. But hey, if you really want to waste my time, I'll return the favor. Bizarre I don't work here situation plus being way too high equals extreme confusion. So this happened Sunday before last. My husband Corey and I were invited by one of our best friends, April, on a trip to the city where she had attended college. It's still in our state, but it's about a 2-hour drive from the rural wasteland where we live. Specifically, April set up the trip so she could introduce my husband to a friend that she'd made at her job while living there. I had met Brent, not his real name, once before, and seeing how much Corey and Brent had in common, I had immediately agreed with her that the two of them would become instant friends if introduced. Sure enough, when we arrived on Saturday and we met up with Brent, the two guys hit it off famously and we had a great time. We checked into our hotel later and the 4 of us ended up staying up way too late that night, playing video games and watching stuff. This is relevant because, even with our late checkout, the next morning we overslept and ended up having to rush in order to check out on time. Due to the rush, I ended up just keeping the oversized shirt I'd worn to bed on and changed into my swim trunks. I'm a woman, but I typically prefer trunks over bikinis. Since I hadn't worn them the day before, the hotel pool had sadly been closed, and we were headed for a nature trail and then home anyway. Plus, they were the only shorts that I had packed and the best option in the 90-degree weather. With our plans, there was no reason for me to really care about my appearance. Keep in mind for later that my trunks were a bright blue and my big comfy shirt had characters from an anime on it. I knew I looked like a hobo who'd wandered into this quite fancy hotel lobby as we checked out. Still, I didn't care because we were leaving. Or so I thought. We said goodbye to Brent, who had to head to work, and I assumed we were heading out as well. Turns out that in the chaos of packing and getting our crap out on time, April hadn't been able to finish her breakfast, and this hotel lobby had a second story just for lounging guests. April plopped down in a comfy chair and pulled out her food, and Corey and I awkwardly sat on the couch next to her, feeling like we shouldn't be there after checkout, though I'd seen people at other hotels do this in the past. Now, before I continue, I need to describe the unique layout of this hotel. It's built on the slope of a large hill. The main lobby led out to the main parking lot at the bottom of the slope. The second floor lobby, which basically looked like a giant version of my grandma's living room, was level with the top of the hill, and it had another parking lot for the guests on the second floor. Still, to be able to get into the second story lobby, you would need a key card for your room, but apparently one of those doors was broken, which is also important to the encounter I would soon have. So, after April finished eating, both her and my husband head down to the main lobby to use the restrooms. This left me alone in this massive lounge because no employees were stationed on the second floor. Now's a good time to mention that I was out of my mind high on a couple of Delta 8 edibles. It was a complete accident on my part, I swear, and I had woken up at around 7 a.m. in a lot of pain. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so I had groggily gotten myself an edible to help ease me off and get back to sleep for a little longer. Well, again, due to the rushing, when we all got up 3 hours later, I forgot that I already had an edible since I didn't feel anything from the first gummy. I assumed that since I fell back asleep before it fully kicked in that my metabolism slowed down and the high was lying in wait for the worst possible timing. So, deciding that I want to feel a relaxing but coherent high on the nature trail, I popped another gummy. The high didn't kick in until right before they headed to the restrooms, but evidently, Both edibles kicked in at once. I was on another plane of existence. And now, I finally arrive at the I don't work here encounter. I had started wandering around while waiting for April and Corey to return, and I found myself in front of a lectern podium, which had the schedule for the photography convention that we had briefly seen being held there the previous day. I'm extremely into photography, so I stood there reading the entire schedule to see what fun activities they had to do at the con. My back was facing the doors that only guests are supposed to have access to, and it was dead silent. Then, suddenly, 2 loud bangs scared the living heck out of my insanely high brain, and I jumped around to see an older yet surprisingly fit looking man, probably in his 50s, yanking on the handle for each of the locked doors. There were 4 doors in total. No one had come through this second-story lobby since we'd been there either, so his sudden appearance unnerved my toasted brain even more. I had instinctually started to step towards the door to help him in, but I paused as I realized that he probably wasn't a guest if he was just aggressively yanking on the locked doors. I watched as this man cursed at each door while pulling the handles multiple times, unsure of what to do, and still scared because I was way too high to be dealing with someone I didn't know by myself. The man went to yank the final door handle as violently as he had the other 3, only for it to open unexpectedly, and it almost hit him in the face from the force of the pull. I was now panicking because this man was obviously very agitated, and I was still the only person in the room that he had possibly just broken the door of to get into. I did the only thing I could think of to avoid him, and I turned back to the podium, this time only pretending to read the convention schedule. Irrational fear that he might be a killer also crossed my mind, so I just kept thinking, please walk past me, go downstairs, and check in like a normal person. Ignore me, please! It felt like an eternity passed, and I hadn't even heard him coming up behind me, so when his loud broke the silence, I jumped yet again and spun around. This guy was maybe 4 feet away from me, possibly closer, and he was close enough that I could smell his sweat. Ugh. His expression was disconcerting as heck, and he stared wide-eyed at me. He looked confused, angry, excited, and basically just insane, all at once. I had no idea what he was expecting me to do. Is he mad I didn't open the door for him? I thought to myself. When I said nothing, that's when crap got weird. He started to kind of blubber at me loudly while looking me up and down. Nothing coming from his mouth could be comprehended as words. The only thing that I was able to pick up on was that he sounded really embarrassed or confused. He wasn't speaking another language, I'm almost positive of that. I just can't do it justice in writing, but it sounded like a string of ta-ta sounds that you'd hear in a comedy sketch making fun of really fancy rich British men. You know, like holding wine glasses and chortling with one another in a deep babbling way. Several seconds passed with him making these deep blubbering sounds, and he pointed at me, and then the podium, and then the hallway to the hotel rooms. My brain finally rebooted and started processing enough to squeak out the words, I don't work. The man cut me off with one curt, extra loud babble, and I shrunk back a little as he stared at me silently for a couple of seconds after. I'm convinced at this point that he may have had a mental disability of some sort and isn't able to speak clearly, or he's possibly having tics. I wanted to help him, but he was absolutely terrifying me. I wanted to tell him that he just needs to head down the stairs to the main lobby, but his stare felt like it was literally penetrating my soul. I despise being that high, especially in public, and this was sending me spiraling. Then, he suddenly says, very, very quietly, okay, so, His sudden, complete change in tone and pitch, and the fact that he just spoke so clearly, made me question reality in that moment. I stood there, still not knowing what else to say, so I end up repeating, sorry, I don't work here, while gesturing to the stairs. This causes him to quickly move towards the glass doors that separate the top of the stairs and the lobby, and his face is burning dark crimson. I can't tell if he's angry or embarrassed or what, so I just wait for him to either go through the doors down to the main lobby or say something else. In a very clear voice, but said very quickly, with what I could now tell was obvious embarrassment, he repeats, "You don't work here." He stated it. There was no question in his voice, then continued, "I go down here, check-in's down there." I nod. Without another word, he furiously jerks the stairwell door open, just like he had with the guest entrance door, and practically ran down the stairs. All I could do was stand there, looking down at the main lobby desk, thinking over and over again, what the heck just happened? I see him approach the desk in record time, and I just continued to watch him in a confused daze, until I assume an employee who I couldn't see from my angle greeted him. I could see his mouth moving, and then he turned to the stairwell, pointing up. We made eye contact for a split second before I snapped out of it and quickly shuffled back to the sofa where all of our bags were. About a minute passes, and I'm silently begging for Corey and April to get back soon. It felt like an hour had passed since they had gone down to the bathrooms, but I checked my phone and saw that the whole encounter with the bizarre man had only lasted about 5 minutes. Another minute passes, and suddenly the stairwell door opens. I look up, hoping to see my husband or best friend, but instead, I lock eyes, again, with none other than the blubbering man. He holds my stare for just a moment with a hard glare, face still red, then turns his head away from me and swiftly walks back out of the door he somehow got into from outside. Of course, like the stone dummy I clearly was at the time, I ended up watching him leave without realizing I was doing it. He glanced back one more time while passing through the doorway, saw me staring like a complete idiot, but instead of glaring now, he just looks embarrassed again. He mutters, "Sorry," so quietly that I'm still wondering if I imagined it or not, then practically ran out to his car. Only seconds after this guy leaves, Corey and April get back upstairs, laughing about something until they see my face. Corey immediately asks me what's wrong, and I do my best to explain that I had the weirdest "I don't work here" situation happen while they were gone. But most of what I'm describing makes no sense to them either. Even now, I have no clue what was going on with that guy exactly. Dude, if you see my post, I'm sorry if in my blazed and confused state of mind I embarrassed you. But really, man, I have no idea how you even began to think I worked there, considering how trashy I looked that day. My best guess is that this man was having a very bad or stressful day and or has really bad social anxiety, which I completely empathize with. I want to add that if he does have a mental disability, I'm not shaming or making fun of him in any way. He wasn't exactly rude or anything, aside from the glaring. It was just incredibly unsettling and bizarre as heck, especially due to how high I was. I hope he's well. Unless he really is some type of criminal, that is. Enjoy your rotten wood, posted by Darkalter 2000. Back in the early 2000s, my mother, 40, female, worked as a cleaner for a couple of places and took me, a 13-year-old male, with her to help. One place we worked for was the only real estate place in town. We cleaned up before the people who worked there got in. When I started there, it was small and somewhat dirty. Old smelly cubicle partitions and faded brown off-color walls, ingrained dirt in the linoleum. We cleaned, and I literally couldn't tell the difference after we were done, except the mirror in the washroom not having any spots on it and the floor being wet from the fresh mopping. Then the town started becoming a cottage town, and it's decided that they'll move to a nicer place. Cottagers might find the griminess a little off-putting. New place had a bit more space, brand new blue cubicle partitions, newly painted walls that still smelled the first day I cleaned in there, and a cheap hardwood panel floor. That floor was a bit of a problem. See, before, when we mopped, we would just leave the water to dry on the linoleum. We could do that because we got there at around 6:30 and they opened it at 7:30. That place, it was small enough that it was mopped by around 7 o'clock before we left, and it'd be mostly dry by the time the people arrived. If we did the same thing for this cheap wood floor, my mother was worried that we would have water seep into the cracks between the wood panels and rot them. So a new method for mopping was devised. First, I dunk the mop, then wring the mop lightly, mop up, wring the mop again, but fully this time, and then mop up as much of the excess water as possible. This new method actually visibly got a lot more water off the floor. By the time we left, some of the earlier mopped areas would look mostly dry. Good solution, Mom. Couple weeks into the new place, my mother gets contacted by the manager and a new order comes in that we are not to dry the floor. I asked if she explained why we dried it, and she had. I found this order a bit baffling at the time, and it only occurred to me today the reason why he ordered this. The manager got in earlier than everyone else at around 7:15, so I actually saw him a few rare times when we ran late. The old floor would have still been visibly wet in the old place when he got in. The new floor was now dry when he got in. Ipso facto, we must have decided to skip mopping to leave early. Even though I didn't understand at the time that he thought we weren't doing our job, I, of course, found this new order stupid. I thought, well, he wants the floors wet when he gets in? Fine. Cue malicious compliance. You see, I did the mopping while my mom cleaned the washroom because I was a young strapping lad and she was Mom, so I did what she said. I now had a standing order from the boss to leave a wet floor, and by gum, it was gonna be sopping. From that day forth, not only did I not dry the floor, I now didn't even wring the mop after dunking it. I dipped it in the water and just let that water slop off the mop as I pulled it directly out of the bucket. There was no way this was going to dry before he got in. Probably not for an hour after he got in either. 2 weeks after I started doing this, lo and behold, the wood paneling is already starting to separate at the seams. Dirt is accumulating between tiles. It proves impossible to remove. I was a bit shocked at the time at how fast that had happened. 4 weeks into the new mopping routine, the floor was rotting. Was my mother psychic or what? It was apparently very cheap fiberboard with a paper-thin plastic wood grain pattern on it. I would have guessed a laminate wood grain on top of semi-waterproof fiberboard if you'd asked me 4 weeks ago. The floor now had visible divots and lines where the plastic paper sank into the deteriorating wood underneath. These trapped dirt in them as well. How classy. The floor, not even 2 months after they had moved into the new place, was even worse than the old beat-up linoleum one. At this point, I asked my mother if we should start drying the floor, and wouldn't you know it, she had already asked. The answer was no. Leave it wet. Baffling. We cleaned there for another month or so. I barely felt safe walking on the floor as it was a now tripping hazard with warped parts popping up. It was also disintegrating. Splinters of wood would pop off every time I swept. The floor now had the dubious distinction of being the worst floor I had seen in a place that wasn't dilapidated. Customers are always right? Posted by Lady Love. So I work as a minimum wage cashier at a discount store. I see a lot of people in a day, especially people who know how to do my job better than me, due to their lack of experience and profound understanding that my job is the easiest in the world. Now, I always shut that crap down in the classic corporate happy public service employee way. Well, actually, it makes it a little easier this way, but thank you so much for helping. Like I'm talking a toddler down from an upcoming tantrum, but I don't leave room for arguing. It's almost like I'm playing a character, honestly. It works for me. But I never just let someone do something stupid, like letting them walk out with a bag too heavy without double bagging it, or letting them leave putting their receipt in their bag if it looks like they might want to return it. But not today. It's Saturday, so it's busy. All day, as I would finally get a minute to get my other work done, someone would come up taking forever to consider the impulse buys while I'm stuck waiting for them at the register getting nothing done. This woman did that, but twice. She got up there, pondered for a minute, got a line behind her, and decided to go look at something else. I'm stuck with this line till just before she gets back and ponders again before finally getting to me. She's your average looking middle-aged soccer mom, but already she's getting on my nerves. But hey, it's Saturday, every customer gets on my nerves, so whatever. She's got a lot of larger but lightweight items with some smaller items like bags of candy and socks. So I'm getting half of it in one large bag, half of it in another large bag. So I go to get the second bag, handing her the first one when she goes, "No, I don't want a lot of bags. You can fit the rest in there. It's fine. You should ask before getting more bags. It's your job to do things how the customers want and ask. Otherwise, you should just know to do one bag if you can. It's wasteful. I only want one bag." And I thought to myself, oh wow, it sounds like she's never done retail a day in her life. She must know what she's doing. Now, it's also worth noting that she had a few heavier items, not many, but a few. They were glass jars of sauces with lots of pigment and staining properties. It's also worth mentioning that she was getting some chips that came in bags with pointy, sharper edges that eat bags for breakfast. The bag gets too heavy and they press into the sides at any angle, and that bag's toast. It's also worth mentioning that she was getting several white clothes made of very stainable material. Nice clothes. She said they were for an important party she had to go to that night, bragging. Normally, I would double bag, which would keep the sharp corners in check. But she was right. She only wanted one bag, so that must be all she needs. So I get the glass jars in with the clothes, nested in there nicely spaced out where they wouldn't hit each other with clothes between them, and the bags on top spread around the top so it was easier to lift the bag, just like she wanted. That dang bag was already looking like it would bust wide open any second when she took it from the counter. Luckily, a line hadn't formed behind her, yet. Just someone looking at the impulse buys over, so I couldn't really step away, but nothing to do but watch where I had a clear view of that parking lot. I watched as she struggled out the two front doors, No automatic, got 1/4 of the way to her car when the bag burst. Glass and sauce everywhere. Sad, like she had $15 worth, about 5 jars. She struggled to force them back into the bag, hoping she could at least pile them in her arms with the bag holding it together, trying not to cut herself on the glass that she had wrapped up. It broke some more. She tried to salvage it and balance it back up. Failed. Gave up. Grabbed as much of an armful as she could. She had to take like 5 trips with her blouse and pants ruined. Maybe after over a year and a half of cashiering nearly every day, I know what I'm doing? Shocker. Promise kept. My sister, Jen, married right out of college and had 5 kids with her husband, Chris, over the next 8 years. He preferred that she stay home with the kids. She wanted to work, but accepted that life took her in a different direction. She cared for the house and kids, and he worked long hours to comfortably support the family. Chris's employer held a black tie dinner and event annually until 2020. Chris always attended alone, insisting that Jen needed to stay home to take care of the kids. The employer resumed the black tie events last year. My nieces and nephews then ranged from 7 to 16 years old and could stay by themselves a few hours. But Jen asked me to pick up her daughter from an activity and help with dinner on the night of the event. No problem. Jen told Chris she had everything arranged for the kids and she was excited to go to the event. Chris said he'd rather go alone because she had put on some weight and wouldn't be able to lose it in time to look good at a formal event, but they can go next year if she tries to get back into shape. My sister called me in tears to cancel our plans. She was shocked that Chris didn't want to be seen with her. I'm not shaming anyone for their weight, but Chris has to be bordering on clinically obese and blamed the extra weight on work stress. Meanwhile, my sister was 6 pounds overweight according to the BMI chart, and she's a natural beauty. Chris wanted her to lose 30 to 40 pounds to look good enough in formal attire. Jen politely declined my offer to castrate Chris and asked that I not discuss this with our family. I reluctantly agreed, but suggested marriage counseling because nothing about that was acceptable. Jen promised Chris that she would lose weight and attend the next year's event. She made an effort to eat healthier and worked out nightly after the kids were settled. She said that Chris was impressed with her determination and loved that she was taking his advice. At our family gatherings, he was more affectionate with her and bragged that she had been losing weight and trying to look her best for him. I bit my tongue so hard that I tasted blood. About 6 months later, the same week that Jen had reached her personal weight loss goal, she took her kids to our parents' house and quietly filed for divorce. I later found out that Chris had refused to entertain even a conversation about marriage counseling, berated Jen in front of the kids, accused her of having affairs in the limited alone time she had to run errands for the family or get a haircut, and privately and publicly often joked that she was stuck with him because no one else would want an unskilled, unemployed 40-something mother of 5. Apparently, his demand of weight loss was the straw that broke the camel's back. Jen is now employed at a job she enjoys and spends tons of quality time with her kids. Chris sees him about 1 weekend a month because his work is too demanding to take care of the younger ones alone more frequently. The older 2 don't go to his house anymore because they say he leaves them to take care for their younger siblings. This past weekend, Jen fulfilled her initial promise to Chris that she would lose weight and attend the next black tie event, but not with him. She went with a longtime friend who works for the same organization as Chris. She wore a beautiful gown and looked stunning. Chris started a conversation with her, during which he put his arm around her waist and tried to physically pull her away from her date. In front of his colleagues, she updated him on the recent accomplishments of their older children, who he had not seen or spoken with in more than 2 months. He awkwardly left shortly afterward, reportedly red-faced. As it turns out, many people want a 40-something mom of 5, a successful man who was Jen's high school sweetheart, a good employer who values her ability to multitask, fine-tuned by years of being a dedicated mom to active kids, and her children, who are generally happy that she left their pompous jerk of a father. You don't mess with people when it comes to computers. Today's story, Neckbeard tries to buy inferior parts to keep money for the build. Malicious compliance intervenes. Posted by Anonymous B315. Now, some people believe the customer is always right. This is a problematic belief. The truth is, most of the time, the customer is an entitled jerk. But you're supposed to perform admirably anyway. This gets harder when you're dealing with anyone who thinks they know something they do not. So, a guy comes into my department and I greet him at the carpet. I tended to be Johnny on the spot whenever someone came in. Welcome to our build your own department. I'm Anonymous. What are we putting together today? The man scoffs at me and says, a computer, obviously. All attitude. He was Neckbeard wearing a My Chemical Romance shirt, pants so tight he had a mushroom top and a mismatched shoes. This was obviously on purpose, as both shoes were clean, they just didn't fit his look. I didn't take much time examining him. My dad had always told me I gotta get the measure of a man with a glance and look him in the eye the whole time. He literally used Testis on this crap. Turn, look, then tell him what cars we saw in that split second. I was decent enough at it, but not great. I instead would tell myself little lyrics on the fly to remember key details. It's become a life habit. I explained this to point out that I wasn't staring at his look, so I'm pretty sure the snickering hens in the general section who didn't work for us were the source of his ire about being judged about his look. He took my smile as me thinking something was funny. I feigned ignorance, like I didn't hear him, and then when he asked again, I apologized and asked him to speak louder. Told him I was hard of hearing. This relaxed him a bit, thinking I couldn't possibly have heard the hens giving him the business. I did, but I wasn't going to show it. With an attitude, he handed me a list and leaned forward shouting, I don't want to be sold nothing. Here's what I need. Go get it. I look at the list and it's pretty thorough. Names of items and SKU numbers. I'm like, bet. This looks like a full build. Good money, though a lot of them I identify as cheaper parts. I tell him it'll take me a few minutes and invite him to take a look around in case he sees anything else he might need. He rudely says he'll wait there and he ain't buying crap else, so don't try none of my snake oil salesman crap. I smile and say, oh no, but it's so good for the joint and muscles. He didn't think it was funny, so I just walked away and got his stuff. Halfway through grabbing his items, I realized that he only looked at prices and not what each thing did. His build had an AMD processor, but he wanted an Intel board. The case he wanted was slim, and the video card he wanted would not fit. He needed a lower profile, though the Intel board had integrated graphics, so I was sure why he picked the card. Also, the power supply he wanted was of lower quality and wattage than the one that came with the case. All in all, I was compelled to ask what the heck he was trying to build. I gathered everything quickly and brought it up, going over each piece with him and getting his approval. I then asked him if all of this was for the same build, which he replied was something smart like, wow, how observant of you, or something like that. I smiled and tried to inform him that some of these parts would not work together, but he simply cut me off. Listen, I don't need you to try to upsell me. I've been building computers for a while. I know what I'm doing. He did not, and I wanted to question that validity of his claim. I asked him then if he would like to hear about our return policy, just in case. He got belligerent, telling me he knows what he's doing and how dare I treat him like he's stupid just because of the way he looks. Granted, he did look stupid, but I think his ire was more for the cute girls giving him crap and insecurity versus anything I said. Alrighty, you're not interested in our return policy or our extended warranty policy, right? I confirmed. We're supposed to ask about the warranties with everyone, but I figured he was not going to take kindly to that, so all I wanted to do was cover my bases. Warranties are for suckers. Do I look like a sucker? He snapped. Yes, he did, but I wasn't going to say that. I just smiled at him and asked if I could double check his list to see if I got everything. I whipped out my phone and took a picture of everything along with the list. I knew most of this was coming back. And I let him go about his day. I didn't even sticker it. I knew what was coming. 2 days later, Neckbeard shows back up, muffin top, 2 different pairs of shoes, and an anime shirt that made Goku look like he has a fisheye head. He looked embarrassed and angry. He had with him someone who I at first thought was his girlfriend, a little Latino woman who was certain was either blind or a gold digger, but turned out to be his sister. Absolutely no resemblance. She was friendly and told me she was trying to build a gaming computer to play Crysis. I was a little incredulous, young, and to be honest at that time, didn't think that girls played games like that. So I turned to him and said, Crysis, and he shrugged. Little lady stepped up and reiterated herself with a bit of friendly mocking because she knew what I was thinking. Apparently, she got crap for being a gamer girl. I just shrugged and told the truth. There was no way in heck that previous build was going to play Crysis very well. The brother, whom I'm going to call Neckbeard from here on out, had an attitude. He said yeah and handed me another list. This one's similar to before. He made no explanation for his previous mistake and just told me to get the new items along with the same line about not upselling him. I looked at the list and I knew right away that the build was not going to play that game very well. I mean, I could get him there with a $1,500 build, barely, but this was something like $900, and that video card, I don't even remember what it was not going to cut it. I told him so, and that maybe he should look at the game specs online, which would help him make a better decision. He told me he had done his homework and just to get what he said. I looked at his sister, pleading, and told her that I could come up with a system that was both affordable and would run the game decently. He interjected and got mad, threatening to get another salesperson, and said okay, but I knew his butt would be back again. As I'm getting his stuff, I hear him away from his sister on the phone. He's telling someone that he wants to finish this up and get the build done. Apparently his parents had allocated some money for this, and he was trying to get a cheap system so he could keep the rest of the money. A real D-bag move, but not my problem. I gathered what he asked for and sent him on his way, but didn't tag the stuff either. He was either coming back or could go to the pool. I saw Neckbeard 2 days later with his little sister in tow, and his parents. He was not dressed like a disaster that day. His parents did all the talking. There was no list. They told me that they trusted their son to get this done, because he was good with computers, but the game wasn't working properly, and they were trying to get everything together for their daughter's birthday, which had apparently passed after the first time I met Neckbeard. The parents then told me they only had $3,000 to spend on this computer. They looked up the average price of high-end gaming rigs and wanted to buy an Alienware, but they were convinced to buy their son to build it themselves, possibly so he can control what they spent. $3,000. This man was trying to snake his parents out of like $2,000 with these crappy builds. They told me to put together something that would work, and I smiled at Neckbeard and said, "What's the $3,000 limit?" They confirmed, and I grinned. Cue malicious compliance. I tell them I can definitely do that and ask if they want to come with me and discuss each part piece by piece and why I think they need it for their game. I go with them and I build a $3,000 system. Neckbeard is losing his crap. Why do we need this? Why do we need that? But no one will listen to him because of his previous failures. I built a system that I'd be proud to own and got it around $2,700 and then explained the warranty and how they could have us build it and have parts and labor on that warranty. And of course they took it. Neckbeard was PO'd because we went a little over, and I even talked his parents into getting a boss monitor for the game. These I certainly stickered. If Neckbeard hadn't been such a jerk, I'd have built him the system that could play the game, and he would have been able to go about his fiendish plan and keep his parents' change. Instead, he got nothing, and his sister got a build that she loved, and a case that she apparently had always wanted, a white Antec with purple fans. Moral of the story, don't be a jerk to your salesman. Tell them what you want and need, and they'll accommodate most times, or at the very least, know what the heck you're doing. If he'd known computers like he'd claimed, this wouldn't have been an issue. Either way, I'm glad things didn't work out for him, and this time, there were no returns. You Made Me Erase the Computer by LDoctor52. I worked for a company for 3 years, and it was awful. Unethical thieves, so getting crap canned was the best thing to happen. I was going to move on anyway. I'm told I'm being let go, pandemic, sales, blah blah. Before I leave, I have to go to HR for an exit interview. While in there, I have to take out my tablet and wipe it. Set it back to factory settings per HR. I confirmed they wanted this. Confirmed. Okay, done. Today, 6 months after being canned, I get a call from the new sales manager asking me what happened, where the files went. It was back to factory settings. They can't recover important documents and on and on. I'm laughing as he's going on and on. I said, "Jim, I erased everything. I erased everything like you asked and HR directed me to do." Jim chimes in. "They did make you reset it, didn't they?" I confirm. "We can't get access to any of the files. There's something wrong with our backup. The rep that's taking your place has no info." Yeah. As Jerry Seinfeld would say, that's a shame. As an edit, I like Jim and was disappointed that I couldn't work with him. We shoot the breeze for a bit and he confirms it's really bad at the former company. The Titanic has hit the iceberg. Grounded because of my grades? No problem. Posted by Naramix. When I was in the 8th grade, my dad got my midterm report that said I had an F in math class. Dad told me I was grounded until the end of the month. So, no phone, no TV, no computer? That's right. Until the end of the month? Exactly. Okay. The next day, my dad found me on the computer playing games. What the heck are you doing? Didn't I say you were grounded? I smiled and nodded. Yeah, until the end of the month. End of the month was yesterday. Today's the 1st. Dad called me smart and threatened to ground me longer. In the end, I spent about a week reading books and listening to music, and my punishment was forgotten about. This witch of an HOA Karen is the worst I've seen. I, 34 male, and my wife, 31 female, have 2 kids, 3 and 1. We liked most of our neighbors, except Karen. She was always jealous and hateful to us, and it all came to a head with a huge surprise for us. So we live in a beautiful cul-de-sac where my family and I just moved into an amazing house with a huge backyard for the kids and to mow. We were thrilled to have such a large outdoor space, and I couldn't wait to turn it into a lush garden paradise, even though my gardening skills actually blow. The best part was that we actually got into a great neighborhood without being in their stupid HOA. Karen, however, lived right next door to us and was always keenly aware of every detail in our lives. It didn't take her long to notice that we weren't using a large part of our yard. While we did maintain it with a neatly trimmed lawn and occasional picnics, we had no immediate plans to build a garage or a shed on the unused portion. This, my friends, was a perfect storm for Karen's jealousy. You see, Karen had a small lawn of her own, barely big enough for a picnic blanket or two, and she could not stand the idea that we had this vast unutilized space. So she hatched a scheme to take matters into her own hands while we were on vacation for 2 weeks. So we locked up our house and said, "See you later," to our lovely neighborhood, and had no idea of the impending chaos that was HOA Karen greeting us upon our return. 2 weeks later, we returned home. The minute we pulled into our driveway, our jaws dropped to the ground. There stood a massive in-ground swimming pool, complete with a little diving board and slide on the side too. What in the world? I tried to control my outburst in front of my kids, but man, it's so hard to do sometimes, especially in a time like this and against a woman like her. We most certainly had not ordered a pool, nor did we have any plans to do so. As we approached, we found a letter wedged in our front door. I picked it up and my hands were shaking as I read it. It was a construction permit from the city, issued to none other than HOA Karen, allowing her to build a pool on our property. Insane. We could not believe our eyes. Karen, that dumb neighbor, had taken advantage of our vacation to construct a pool right in our own backyard. We scrambled inside with rage and began searching the house for any clues. Our first thought was that perhaps it was a well-intentioned surprise from like a close friend or a family member. But as we investigated further, we found the truth. So we were out of options, and we're just still trying to wrap our heads around this ridiculous situation, and we decided to check our home security cameras. We scrolled through the footage, and that's when we hit the jackpot, baby. There, in all of her glory, was Karen herself, supervising the construction crew as they installed the pool, all while smirking like that she thought she owned the place. We couldn't believe our luck, or should I say, her bad judgment. With evidence in hand, we took the next logical step. We contacted the HOA president and our lawyer. The conversation was nothing short of a roller coaster. The HOA president was as shocked as we were. He assured us that Karen had never received any approval for such a project, even from the HOA. We never got along with the idea of an HOA, and we weren't subjected to their regulations or fees, so where did all this crap come from? Our lawyer, on the other hand, was quite amused by the case, seeing it as an opportunity to give Karen a taste of her own medicine. With the evidence from our security cameras and construction permit, we had a strong case against her. He suggested that we gather estimates for the removal of the pool and any potential damage that it had caused on our property, and that we should also keep a record of any other related expenses. So then we submitted the evidence to the HOA president, who promptly called an emergency meeting with the association board. It didn't take long for them to come to a unanimous decision. Karen was in deep trouble, almost as deep as the pool that she thought she could get away with. HOA president paid us a visit to inform us of their decision. Karen was fined a substantial amount for her unauthorized construction project, which would help cover the cost of removing the pool. Additionally, she was ordered to compensate us for any damage that her pool had caused to our property. It was a sweet victory for us and a bitter pill for Karen to swallow. With the legal process started, we embarked on the tough task of removing the pool. The construction crew, who didn't realize they were accomplices in Karen's idiotic plan, arrived and began the process of dismantling what was now a giant eyesore in our backyard. We watched with a mixture of satisfaction and relief as the once beautiful monstrosity came crashing down piece by piece. HOA Karen's little project had cost her dearly, not just in terms of the fines and the money that she had to pay us, but also in her reputation. Her attempt to seize our property had backfired awesomely. At least she knows not to try and pull that crap again. HOA documents were hastily drafted by an attorney with an AOL email address, while the billing was hastily converted from apartments to condos during the 2006 and 7 housing bubble, so you know the documents are bulletproof. We have 6 owner-occupants and 6 rental units, with 4 of the landlords living outside of the city and 2 of the landlords living outside of the state. Our treasurer contracts cleaning and gardening to herself and reimburses herself for her cleaning services by transferring money from the HOA account to her personal account, and nobody says or does anything about it. No tax returns, no 1099s, nothing. Conflict of interest at best, embezzlement at worst. She interprets the documents however it's convenient for her, and you can quote her directly back to herself and she will backpedal. Enough backstory. Our board is willing to spend $2,000 on an amendment to ban cannabis and tobacco smoking before legalization takes effect on August 1st, and has been using some pretty shady techniques for the amendment and the vote, but they are not willing to spend $1,800 to mitigate radon on the garden level, which is the equivalent of 12 cigarettes a day. The building has always been non-smoking from the very beginning, even though it's never been in the documents. Are there good carcinogens and bad carcinogens? One of the absentee landlords on the board responded to the above question with, "As an HOA, I think that everyone should assume positive intent by other owners. We are all volunteers and we all have a lot going on in our lives. If you want your dues to go up substantially, we can hire someone to manage the HOA. Do you really think a company will care about what is happening in a small 12-unit building? Gaslighting, yay! Do people with positive intent usually have to ask you to assume positive intent? Certainly, being a volunteer with a very busy life excuses lack of response to building maintenance, lawn care, snow removal, and so on. I'm sure the LLC that our secretary owns for her rental unit is very concerned about what is happening in a small 12-unit building. Perhaps she would feel more comfortable if she kept to her suburban McMansion 30 miles away and left the management of the building to us poors. What is the appropriate level of shade and trolling for my response? I wasn't even going to attend the meeting so they wouldn't have a quorum, until they sent a reminder that if you didn't have a proxy, the board would be your proxy. I also got them to postpone the vote until after August 1st, because one of my garden level peers, a medical MJ patient, is pending sale. The least they can do is allow the new owner to have a voice, right? I am thinking about voting present so that they meet their quorum, but one less vote towards a majority. HOA assistance and advice, posted by JoeSal35. I need some assistance and advice with my HOA. My wife and I live in a condo and townhome community in New Jersey. In late June of this year, I decided to replace my kitchen faucet as a phase of one of several home improvement projects. After watching several kitchen faucet replacement videos, I decided to call a plumber. When the plumbers arrived, they realized that the shutoff valve into the unit was broken. They stated that they're able to fix it, but first we would need permission from the HOA and their maintenance would have to shut off the valve into the entire building, thus turning off everyone else's water. Basically, I'm responsible for everything inside the unit and the HOA is responsible for the outside. So I conveyed this to the HOA and they decided to send out the maintenance man to look for our unit's shutoff valve, as they did not believe that the plumbers knew where it was. After 20 minutes, the maintenance man agreed that the shutoff valve that the plumbers identified is, in fact, the shutoff valve. We then agreed with the HOA management that we would shut off the water into the building for the plumbers to do the work. I arranged for a time for the plumbers to come back at 9 a.m. the next day with the HOA's permission. The HOA stated that the maintenance man would be there to help. When the next day rolled around, The maintenance man came in at 7:30 a.m., tried to shut off the unit's shutoff valve, and left for a doctor's appointment after saying the plumber can work with a small amount of water trickle coming through the kitchen faucet. Needless to say, the plumbers disagreed. Maintenance workers from other units had to come and help the plumbers, but they realized that the shutoff valve into the building was also broken. The plumbers had to leave after 2 hours, to which I had to pay their appearance rate. After more back and forth with the HOA, they decided that a special plumber needed to fix the building's shutoff valve. It is now late July, and the HOA stated that there is no diagram of the development's pipe layout and that they do not know where the building's shutoff valve is. The excuse that they gave me is that there were several different developers who built the different buildings, and they lost the diagrams along the way. I can't move on with my home improvement projects until this is fixed, and I'm also concerned that if a water emergency were to happen in either my unit or my neighbors, we'd be in big trouble. Also, I don't think it's acceptable for them to not know where the unit's pipes are. The master deed states that they are to maintain the water system. Although they're attempting to fix it now, it does not seem that they've done so previously, and their ineptitude is costing us money. Does anyone have any advice? Is a lawsuit possible? This commenter says that he's kind of screwed, needs to keep pushing the HOA and get a lawyer, and then talks about getting a good plumber if the HOA can't do it. Entitled coworker got herself fired, posted by Dragon Crystal. Backstory: I never personally worked with this Karen, but I'd seen her chatting with everyone in our department on the workplace chat group made by the department manager. It reached the point where she just refused to work unless it was under her terms and made up excuses on why she couldn't work her assigned shifts. I'm just going to list off a few things that I recall seeing on work chat, a bit of my short experience with her, and then I'll mention what I was told by coworkers and what leads up to when she was eventually let go due to refusing to work her shifts and whatnot. So there's going to be me, Karen, and a few coworkers: Bella, Derry, Zelda, a manager, and Jane, another manager. Karen said, "Hey, anyone want Thursday off? I can take your shift and you can get the day off instead." Coworker said, "Sure, you can take my 11 to 5 shift." Actually, I meant night shift," Karen replied. "Oh, okay, that's fine, but I'm still leaving it open for grabs because I've got things to do and I can't make it." "Karen, you can take my 5 to 11 p.m. shift because I have to open the following day," another coworker said. Karen replied, "I can't work later than 10 p.m. I need my sleep and I live very far from here." Now, as a note, I didn't respond because I was at work and I was only able to take a quick glimpse at my phone. Also, I only work mornings, so I usually don't respond to picking up night shifts, and I only respond to shifts that I know I can pick up or if I'm messaged personally by a fellow coworker. Several days later, Karen says, "Hey, can anyone pick up my night shift? I'm not feeling well and I've been feeling off all of these days." Nobody responded because we were all busy or dealing with other things at the moment. Was told a few days later she never showed up to her shift that day or called out. Days later, Karen says again, "Does anyone want my morning shift for their night shift? I'm not a morning person and I really need my sleep. Hey, hello? Does anyone want my morning shift? It's from 11 to 5. 5 minutes goes by with no response, and I've seen her message, but it was in the middle of rush hour and I had a rush of drinks to make. Also, that shift was technically a mid-shift, not even morning shift anymore. I know, because I'm scheduled that shift several times." Karen says, "Wow, so that's how it's gonna be. If nobody wanted my shift, then just say it. Don't ignore me like that. That's rude." She unsends the message before saying, "Oh, sorry, I didn't type that. It was my sister who wrote that last part." Sure, Karen. Now comes my short experience with her. On the first day, she was supposed to be my night replacement along with Bella, the other coworker. It was a bit busy, so I stayed a few minutes behind to help Bella catch up on drink orders before noticing that Karen has yet to show up. So I went to Zelda, the manager, and I told her, "Hey, Karen hasn't shown up yet and it's past my out time. Did you want me to stay and wait or I can head out?" Manager says, "Give me 2 minutes and I'll give Karen a call." Now, I'm not worried about it, so I agreed and I went back to helping Bella again. It's about 15 minutes after my shift and Bella is all caught up with the drinks and told me that I can head out until Karen arrives, so I approach Zelda, the manager, to see Karen's status. Manager says, So I called Karen, and she's currently stuck in traffic. If Bella is all caught up with drinks, you can head out. So I confirmed that I just helped Bella get caught up with everything, and the manager gives me the okay to leave for the day. Day 2, Karen again pulls the same thing, claiming she was again going to be late due to being stuck in traffic. Luckily, that day was a very, very slow day, and I was allowed to leave on time as soon as Bella arrived to replace me. Now is when she was fired. Derry, another coworker of mine, told me after I found out that Karen was fired that she'd never actually want to run any drinks except 1 or 2 the entire shift and would always be on her phone or wandering off somewhere to hide until managers intervened to get her back to work. Then she'd refuse to assist with bringing dirty dishes down to be washed and make everyone else do it instead, as well as fake to not being feeling well right after clocking in for work and then getting sent home, as well as picking up shifts and then just not showing up to them, or claiming I overslept and didn't hear my alarm, or I misread my schedule and thought I was working tomorrow, while again pulling another no-call, no-show. Management had enough and fired her along with several other people too. One whom I'll mention was caught sleeping on the job and smugly said to a fellow co-worker, "You owe me for making me have to bring these dishes downstairs to be washed," when she and several other people were having upset stomachs due to something they ate for lunch that evening. She didn't owe him anything. He was sleeping on the job and she was doing all the work. She was perfectly fine after a few hours and still works there. I don't know how this Karen lasted as long as she did. You'd think she'd be axed way before this point. Shady landlord loses his fancy truck and just about everything else. Posted by Zarina Blue. My ex-husband and I have always gotten along very well, and we have, at the time of the story, 7 years old, a daughter. We have always lived near each other for convenience sake, and have, on occasion, even lived in the same house after divorcing. So I was thrilled when the people across the street from him sold their place, and apparently it was going to be for rent. I had known the folks across the street, nice people, and had even been in the house a time or two, so when I showed up with my other half to look the place over, I kinda knew what we'd be getting. The landlord was working on the house when we pulled up. We had gone out to eat before this, and so I know he was unaware that he was talking to someone who knew the people who had lived there and been in the house. His big old dually was in the drive with his company name stenciled on it. He meets us in the garage and immediately starts lying. He told me this was his family home and he was fixing it up, but there were a lot of memories there and his kids had grown up in that house. I realized that he was adding value. I kept my mouth shut because it was right across the street from my ex-husband and it was literally the bus stop for the school for my daughter. He continued to lie and I kinda tuned him out. The place was a little worse for wear and dirty, gross carpet and chipped paint. I made a comment on the broken light switch and he told me he was having a cleaning crew come through and clean up the place and have everything painted and the carpet redone. The price was a little high, but once again I really wanted it, and it wasn't nightmare high, just $200 over what I was expecting. I had a small Australian Shepherd, so first month's rent, last month's rent, and pet deposit. $1,250 for each one. Ouch. So about 2 weeks later, it was move-in day. I should have known something was up when the key was left in a combo box on the door. We had paid through a service, so he had the money, and we had the key, and a mess. He had done literally nothing except replace a set of rotted outdoor steps that he probably had to for liability purposes. We dragged out the digital camera and started taking pictures. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a partial basement. We took over 1,100 pictures. Here are some highlights. Ketchup was smeared on the kitchen walls and floor and nothing in there had been clean. The fridge was awful. Had what smelled like hair gel rubbed into it in the dining room and outside the front bathroom door. The fireplace literally had soot covering all of it and up to the ceiling. The reason for all these non-working lights became apparent at the point. He kept it dim for showings. There was a garage full of trash, a partial basement which we hadn't seen because that was where he had a big saw set up and it wasn't really a selling point for us. Mold. All the mold. So I called him up and basically said, "What the heck?" And he replied that money and keys had already exchanged hands and if I had a problem, I needed to put in a maintenance request. He said, "I don't remember it being that bad. Sounds like you made a mess moving in." Okay, so now I knew exactly how crappy of a person I'm dealing with. I put in a maintenance request about the mold, went out and bought all the bleach, other cleaning supplies, and carpet cleaner. I'm a military brat who lived in base housing. I know how to clean, and we got to work. It took 2 days of 4 adults, my ex, and a friend who came over to help to get this place passable. We even changed out the blinds. They were broken and dangerous. During this, my landlord comes over to look at the mold and, I kid you not, grabs a roll of my paper towels and my bleach spray and starts wiping the mold off the walls. He had just walked into the garage, grabbed some cleaning stuff that I had down in the garage, and I found him about halfway through his cleaning job. That's all he did. Fast forward 3 months. Time for an inspection. Okay, he tells me he'll be there tomorrow at 8 a.m. He shows up at 6:30 p.m., demands to be let in. I let him in, and he starts taking pictures of dishes in the sink. Dinner was still on the table, and then lecturing me about cleaning up when I cook. So in front of him, I pulled out my digital camera and took one of him taking a pic of the dishes for dinner with the dinner still on the table and a time date stamp. Jerk. He wanted to go through drawers in my bedroom. I just laughed at him. Didn't hear from him again until move-out time. If you thought that I was staying there longer than a year, then you're crazier than what I was when I rented that place. He sent me a move-out checklist, professional steam cleaning and white glove clean of the entire house, new pine straw for landscaping. All rooms needed to be repainted wheat. When we moved in, the bathroom was literally turquoise. So we got to work. Steam cleaned, white glove clean, and so on, and then took another 1,000 pictures. He walks through and is ticked. He even had a white rag on top of the ceiling fan. He snatched the keys out of my hand and told me to expect to hear from him in 10 days about the deposit. That doesn't sound good. 2 weeks later, I get a bill for $3,750 for more professional steam cleaning, HVAC cleanout, and apparently we didn't use the right brand of wheat. Oh yes, we did. 2 things I haven't disclosed. I have a bad habit of recording bad people or just to cover my butt, and my mom is a landlord in the next state. She's the good kind who was never able to make money at it. If people told her they couldn't afford to pay her because they needed the money to feed their children, well, my mom usually gave them money. So glad she got out. But my mom was very familiar with the laws and had looked a few things up about my landlord. So I grabbed my little recorder and called him. He owns a real estate business. His side is rental stuff, and his wife's and grown daughters bought and sold houses. His oldest daughter picks up and transfers me to him. It gets ugly fast, and he tells me that I must have let my Australian Shepherd pee in the vent grates. What the heck? And that the way I take care of my daughter would be very interesting to CPS. He can help me work out a payment plan, but pretty soon we will be getting into collections territory. At one point, he actually says that, quote, all tenants are liars, end quote. Nice, about 20 minutes of being threatened. I call my mom back. To be honest, I'm pretty dang shook up. CPS for what? So my mom tells me to pretend like I'm playing along and ask for an itemized receipt. Tell him your mom is going to cover it and tell him your mom needs it before turning over the money. I had one 10 minutes after I asked, on my end. The professional steam cleaner was a friend of mine who had a business and gave me a discount. HVAC was a scam. The company he listed belonging to his brother-in-law was defunct and out of another state. Since I had before, after, and his new listing pictures, I knew he hadn't hired anyone to do HVAC cleaning. The vents were painted to the wall in all the pics. We saved our paint receipts and I actually had pics of us painting. You can see the right brand and color, clear as day. I called his business and told his daughter that I would be taking them to court. She obviously was unaware of what crap her father was because when I told her, no one threatens my little girl, she didn't know what I was talking about. So I put her on speakerphone and played a recording of her dad threatening to have CPS come visit if I didn't pay up, and she made it most of the way through before asking me to turn it off. And then she put me on hold to get her mom, his wife. She tried to reason with me, and I backed up the tape to the part to where he talks about what happens to kids in the foster system and played it. She told me they would get back to me, and they actually did. The mom and eldest called me on speakerphone and apologized. They told me how the business was divided and how they normally don't deal with rental stuff. I told them it was fine, but I was still taking him to court. Time for court. We ended up in arbitration. I showed up with 2 laptops for before and after, proof of his fake HVAC crap, a stack of literal receipts, him committing a crime by threatening to falsely call CPS, and a pretty good working knowledge of renter law in that state. At one point, the arbitrator asked me if I was a paralegal. He had a picture of dirty dishes and stories about how I lived like a pig. I pulled up the pic of the same sink of dishes with dinner in the foreground, time and date stamped. The arbitrator actually asked, did you expect her to do the dishes before she ate dinner? Even the woman taking notes for the arbitrator was grossed out when I showed them the ketchup and the basement mold pics. Did you know that you can get 3 times what you ask for in a rental dispute, depending on your state? Yeah, you can. I did. The arbitrator used the word appalling when describing the landlord's behavior. When I went out in the hallway afterwards, there was a young couple there asking the clerk if the landlord was available yet. Apparently, they were waiting for their turn at arbitration. I asked them if their case was HVAC related, and sure enough, it was. I pulled out all the paperwork I had about it and handed it to them with my number. I actually got several calls from his other tenants. He had been running that scam for a while, and these kids I had handed the paper to had looked up every house on the landlord's website and went door to door warning them. Smart, I hadn't thought of that. Meanwhile, my mother was filing a complaint with everyone she could think of because he had his business listed as a suite, which turned out to be a P.O. box. Huge no-no. Your business must be a location that can be served by the courts. A year later, I saw a truck with his logo drive past, but it wasn't the dually, it was an older F-150, so I looked him up in the county clerk's records. Well, first, it seems he got divorced and cleaned out. The house, the big truck, everything went to her. And then she sued him for the business. He got to keep the name, and she took everything else. I looked up the realty website using her maiden name to search. Her and the eldest daughter were using the maiden name and had a whole new webpage and setup. Also, my mom got notice that her complaint was being addressed, and he had his license suspended and a huge fine to get reinstated. My mom kept an eye on the records for home deeds in the area, and all but 2 of his properties were sold at auction. So, let's sum up. He had to pay me 3 times what I asked for, lost his big money-making scam, lost his wife, lost his houses, lost his truck, lost his license for a while. No regrets. How an HOA destroyed my parents. So this happened almost 10 plus years ago, but has cemented my hatred for HOAs. My family is from Guam, a small Pacific island in U.S. territory where there isn't much, if any, HOAs. We moved stateside around 2001 and 2002 when my dad decided that he wanted to. My parents had good jobs and made good money and had decent credit. We lived in Tennessee for a while until we drove up to Indiana to visit some family. I guess my dad liked it so much that he decided to move there. Well, after my parents got transferred to their business's Indiana branch, a few months later, we moved there. Our house was very modest, but a bit more extra than most because it was a part of an HOA. A few months living there, my dad noticed a crack in the garage. It was a poor foundation, and notified our builder. The HOA was still being built, so he was easy to find. The builder said that he'd take a look. Come to find out that not only was the foundation poorly set, but the plot of land it was on was sinking, which is a screwed up thing number 1. My parents were told that, in order to fix it, it would cost more than their home loan because of the condition of the land it was on. The builder suggested that they pay him 25% cash of the home's value, and he'll build them a new house with their current mortgage, cut down 25% as a good faith gesture. Screwed up thing number 2. As you're reading and listening to this, you're probably thinking, well, that can't be right. That's not legal. That's not how it works. Well, yeah, you're right, but being from a small island where you can trust someone at their word, it didn't occur to my parents to question it or get legal advice. Anyways, back to the story. So the new house is built, nicer than our previous home and not sinking. Life is good for a while until we had to go on an extended trip due to family emergency. Luckily, at this point, we'd been living there for years and my parents made some friends. We would have just left, but one of their friends let them know that they needed to inform the HOA that some lawn and garden standards wouldn't be kept due to the trip. Yes, my parents should have read the bylaws, but at first they were excited to own a home, so they never did. At the time of the emergency, they weren't thinking about anything but getting back to Guam. So my parents, still thinking that a face-to-face with the HOA board would be good enough, did just that. Told them during an HOA meeting, well, that's it. Well, our trip took a little while longer than expected. The whole summer and part of the first school year, but we finally got home. Waiting at our door were countless letters, warnings, fines, and more fines. Screwed up thing number 3. I don't exactly remember what was the total, but it really doesn't matter. My parents were broke. They spent their savings getting us to and from Guam and paying the mortgage, so yeah, no back fund. My parents went straight to the HOA for answers. Basically, it boiled down to, they didn't notify the HOA of the reason for the drop in standards, so they were well within their rights to post fines. And the worst part, put a lien on our home. My parents barely covered the mortgage and the trip to Guam. They tried reasoning with them until eventually they went to court. As you're guessing from the title, it didn't go well. The HOA board hung on to the fact that my parents didn't send an email and wait for board approval. They won. My parents were forced to pay the lien while also paying the mortgage. At first, my parents were optimistic, but it got to the point where it was pay the mortgage and fines or feed my brothers and I. They fell further behind and were starting to fight about it. It became too much for them, so they had to walk away from our home. My mom was devastated, and my dad felt like a failure. I was old enough to understand what was going on, but my brothers didn't know why we had to leave our home. The whole ordeal destroyed my parents' credit, wiped out their savings, and cost my parents their good job. Mom had a job in finance requiring good credit, and my dad had to work closer to home because of the financial situation. I don't think there's any way they can recover from what they walked away from, but they're not fighting and don't have to choose between paying rent and feeding my brother. The whole experience made me really hate HOAs. While I understand why they are needed, and in some cases make complete sense, I will never move my family into one if I can help it. Do you think the HOA should have shown grace? While they were technically within the rules, they definitely took advantage of them because, well, money, right? How would have you handled it? This HOA story has an update. My condo association experience has been interesting. 239 unit high-rise in Maryland that has major capital repairs underway. The building is 40 years old, and most residents are 60 plus and have lived here under a $300 a month condo fee up until 2015, basically free, not paying for, well, anything but the basic building bills. So now the fee is $640, and on January 1st will be $840. I found out that they're dumping $500,000 on HVAC units that are in the condos. There was an amendment that allowed them to do this in 2007 because it switched all of them over to Energy Star. This was good as a whole and legal because the building supplies electric, and electric had just been deregulated, not to mention tax credits. But nothing about the amendment replaced or overrides that the HVACs, PTACs, are owner's responsibility. It's listed specifically in a list of things that the owner is responsible for. Or the fact that bylaws state any repairs done in a unit by the association using common funds will be immediately assessed to the unit. So they just started replacing them again for free because the 2007 units can no longer be fixed. Oh yeah, they have been maintaining them the whole time. There is no PTAC made since 2009 that is not energy efficient, so there is no benefit to doing this. The building saved more than it spent on them in 2007 and 8. So as there is no longer a return on it, there is no basis of doing it, as now it is just an expense. They claim they own the units, which I never read or signed an agreement at closing stating of there being 3 common elements inside the 4 walls I purchased. Meanwhile, the one repair to the building is over $2 million, and they have automatic entrance doors, a fire pump, generator, and garage doors to go, at somewhere in the park of $400,000. So instead of stopping the illegal, according to the bylaws, free living insanity and having the ability to say money is earmarked for said repairs, they're choosing to continue what got the building here. 2 members of the board are related. After I called the HVACs out at a meeting, the president and a budget committee member resigned, and the board held a closed-door temporary appointment selecting another relative. 3 kin on a 7-member board. So here's the follow-up. To address the issue of the condo association replacing the PTAC's heating and cooling units, like in hotels, for free when our bylaws state 3 different ways that they're not to be doing it, at the cost of $70,000 a year, the board had to schedule a meeting for after the general meeting. My guess is so that we don't discuss it in front of the other members. They said they had to consult with their lawyer that they were meeting with the following day for a different issue. We got an email later that day from the president stating that our reading of the bylaws was correct, but they are going to continue to do so at their discretion. Huh? The bylaws clearly state what common funds can be used for, and if they are used for any repair inside of a private unit, that unit is to be given 10 days notice of pending repair. And once the repair is made, the condo unit is assessed and payable immediately. This led to, at the next meeting, the board crying they had to pay legal fees because they're not lawyers and they were challenged on something. Here's where it gets fun. At the same private meeting, we had to address an issue with our downstairs neighbor who aggressively, like pounding on our door like you see like when the U.S. Marshal delivers warrants, said that we were hammering on our floor at 1 a.m. over 2 nights. I work 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so yeah, that's not us. He has mental issues, a violent history, and has suffered a brain injury on top of it. What he's hearing is the elevator brakes from the elevator control room 4 floors above. The sound radiates through the concrete floors or the ceiling, depending on where the lift cars are. making it sound in random places of the condo unit. Their solution was they want to inspect our unit to make sure it's 80% carpet, and we told them no. They said, well, how are we to make sure that you're in compliance? We told them in the state of Maryland you can only enter to investigate damage that threatens another unit or public safety, an emergency, or to get a limited common element to inspect, like a balcony or fire system. This is covered under Maryland 2018 Condo Act that they cite every meeting when talking about our reserve fund. Fast forward a week. We get a letter from their lawyer saying playing cat and mouse never ends well and we need to comply. So here we are with a long sitting board that is cognitively on autopilot. Only 2 of the 7 are under 72 years old. A property manager that is to keep them away from breaking laws and civil rights, opening the COA to litigation, and an elderly real estate lawyer, 45 plus years practicing, that's never read the bylaws except for regulations for meetings and budget or the state law outside of mandatory budget requirements, a reserve study, and this is truly 3 blind mice. The pain is real. I hope they are dumb enough to file at this point. From all the communications, on paper at that, I swear they think it's 1995. The law was fast and loose back then. The lawyer may be a real estate lawyer, which is effective for foreclosing a lien, but he's not an HOA lawyer in the least. Don't waste your time and keep busy? Alrighty then. This happened back when I was in high school in my senior year. I worked as a cashier and bagger at a local grocery store, a pretty big chain in the mid-Atlantic US, and I started as a bagger and then was trained as a cashier after a year. I got paid a bit over minimum wage and usually worked between 25 to 36 hours a week, mostly 7.5-hour shifts so they didn't have to give me a lunch, just a 15-minute break, which I wasn't guaranteed. It was a pretty crap job and people were always calling off. If you've worked or do work in retail, you can probably guess why. So there was usually a lot of available shifts so long as you didn't go over on your hours. If you were part-time and over 18, like I was, you couldn't work more than 36 hours a week. At the time of this story, I had been working there for about 3 years and was well liked by mostly everyone. I had customers who would only check out with me if I was working, and I generally just kept busy if things were slow. I'd empty the trash cans under each register, refill the bags, and so on. My supervisors generally had me in the express lanes on Sundays, which was always our busiest day, because they knew I could do the job and would do it right. I didn't want to rise to checkout coach, which was a front-end supervisor, because that would mean full-time and no social life, so I was happy where I was. Important note, my store was known as a training store, meaning that we usually had a new manager every 6 months or so. We had a rotation of general managers who were regular, but always at least one manager in training. Generally, they'd move on after 6 months. Sometimes they came back as a department manager, I think like dairy or produce, but mostly we never saw them after their stint was up. Sometimes we got some pretty good ones. Most of them were not great. And then there was Mel. Mel was a manager in training when I started working at 15. She was and is also a lesbian. Being a lesbian in a small town where being anything but heteronormal in a predominantly red state in the early 2000s was, well, not very common. And Mel was a full-blown feminist lesbian. I don't know if she had a bad experience with men or generally just saw anything with a man as the source of all her troubles, but regardless, she generally didn't treat us guys very well. She had rotated out after 6 months, and then my senior year came back as the PM front-end manager, or FEM. This meant that she was in charge of the checkout area from about 3:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. After about 5, the GMs generally went home and the department managers usually left about the same time. So after 5 p.m., the front-end manager was usually the person in charge of the entire store. They could call a local GM should they absolutely need to, but they were expected to handle everything that came their way. Our story takes place in August 2007. I had turned 18 back in January. This meant that I could legally work up to 36 hours, and often did. I was also known as the person who would almost always come in if someone called off. Lo and behold, on a random Saturday afternoon, I took a shift working 4 to 11 p.m. as a bagger. I told the manager that I would have to clock out by 10:45 or it would put me over my hours, which the store could get in big trouble for. They said that would be fine. I took the call at 2:30 and I clocked in at 4 o'clock on the dot. I talked to the morning front-end manager to make sure I had to punch out by 10:45 and not a second later. Otherwise, the store could be in serious trouble. This is key for later. I said, sure, no problem. I remembered the AM front-end manager wrote it on the schedule that was kept at the front end. If you were on the schedule as a bagger, that is what you were. They could have you jump on a register if it got busy, but they tried to keep as few lanes open as they could. I was told by the morning front-end manager to jump on a register for a bit after work rush and then go out and do carts. I did this and promptly went outside to collect carts. It was a big lot, several acres, and people generally don't put carts in the corrals. As I was the only one doing carts and the day shift slacked off as it was hot as heck that day, there were a lot of carts to collect. I spent a good hour getting the carts back in the store. When I came back in, the morning front-end manager was gone, and in their place was Mel. Mel and I usually butted heads at least once a month. Nothing terrible, but she was known for making me do crap parts of the job. One time, she made me pull an old cooler away from the wall to clean behind it because someone had spilled milk the day before and it had seeped underneath where the compressor was and so smelled horrific, despite having trained custodial staff. I'd have to mop floors, stock sugar and water, dust around registers, and so on. Mind you, she never made any of the girls do this, even if they were just standing around. Just us guys, and me in particular. I have no idea why she disliked me so, but she did, and it sucked. By this point, it was about 6:30. Most of the cashiers were cleaning their belts and then leaving once their shift was up. When I walked in from doing carts, Mel made a beeline for me and told me that I had to stock sugar and water immediately. Biting my tongue, I went to the back to grab a cart to stock sugar and water. This sucked because it was the store brand 5-pound sugar containers that were never sealed well and the massive 24-pack water. And while the sugar usually wasn't bad, on a hot day, the water tended to sell out quick, which meant lots of stocking. I spent another 30 minutes refilling the sugar and water. Before heading back up, I stopped to hit the head and hydrate. Once back up front, it was dead. One cashier, the checkout coach, and Mel. And then me. The cashier was a girl who I knew, and I had dated her best friend briefly and talked to every now and then. To keep from getting told to do something, I refilled the bags at the end of each lane and collected the baskets. By now, it was 7 o'clock. It was usually extremely dead at this point. Because there wasn't much to do, I started chatting with the cashier. All of a sudden, I hear my name being called. Mel said, "Austin, come here." I walk over to the front end counter where she and her friend, the checkout coach, were just talking before she saw me talking to the cashier. I said, "What's up?" "I know you like talking to the girls, but you're here to work, not waste my time. You know you're supposed to keep busy. You're wasting my time here. You can go and do garbage now and replace all the bags." I was ticked. Here I was working extra hours and I had to put up with Mel and being told I was slacking when it was known that I was a pretty good worker. But as I walked away, a plan formulated. Garbage was just that, collecting garbage. The store had approximately 50 garbage cans of all sizes inside the store, 4 outside by the entrances, 6 in the corrals, and 8 at the gas station that was approximately 200 yards away. Most of the bags were the big industrial size ones that you can fit a Mini Cooper in. Garage detail sucked, but generally, if the day shift did it in the morning, it wasn't bad, but they never did. We had to use what we called U-boats, which were inversed U-shaped handles, to collect garbage, which is about as useful as a tanning bed in the Sahara. You could only put a few bags on it at a time before it was full and you had to go slow so the bags didn't fall off and rip. Sometimes I'd tie the bags to the U-boat, but that meant that they were free to swing around. Because I just did the job the way they wanted, I was usually asked to do it, but only if the bags were full or ripped. Replacing all the bags, taking them through the store to the compactor, and doing a good job usually took a minimum of 2 hours. but usually closer to 3, which was part of my plan. And once you started garbage, you had to finish it, which was also part of my plan. See, management had problems with people timing it, so they had to leave before doing half the garbage. I remember going to the back and finding exactly one U-boat free. I always grabbed a new roll of bags when doing garbage. Usually, when doing garbage, I'd do the ones nearest the compactor first, so I didn't need to put them on the U-boat. I just carry them back. The only department I wasn't allowed to do was the meat department, which was probably a safety thing with the knives and equipment. So I did all the garbage in the back of the store first, and then worked my way forward, replacing all the bags as I went. Because the bags were huge, I'd have to tie them smaller so they'd fit the cans. While this isn't hard, they needed to be tight or the bag would fall inside the can, and the can would need to be cleaned out using a hose and sanitizer, which I never understood this. I eventually make it to the front end, where I go through and get the garbage from behind the front end. Mel usually watched me, like legit would turn around and watch me do garbage. The U-boat is full, so I wheel it back to the compactor, which is now full. As I was not a manager, I wasn't allowed to run it. So I had to go get Mel to run it, which there was a key to keep it off, which entailed her ordering me to stuff more garbage in it without helping me. The compactor really was just a dumpster that compacted the trash. The door we used only opened to the chute. You had to be careful to make sure the compactor was retracted before adding more garbage to the chute, otherwise it could damage the machinery. That was the story I was told. Mel, being the conscientious manager, made sure that it was retracted before I added more. The snag was, the machine was slow, especially when the dumpster was empty. There was no way to see how empty it was other than to just listen to it and stop it when it seemed to be under stress. As Mel was in a hurry to get back to the front end, ordered me to just stack the garbage in front of the door to the chute and then to let her know when I was done with garbage, then I could add the garbage to the chute with her running the compactor. Problem was, I was now heading outside. This was the part that took the longest, as cans next to the entrance were always full. The corrals were pretty far apart, and their cans were always full. I found a whole fake Christmas tree in a corral garbage can once. And then there was the gas station cans, which were always full. This was going to take at least an hour, and it was already about 9 o'clock. If I was in a hurry, which I wasn't. Why not, you ask? Because it was Saturday night, and Saturday night meant that the local farm took their migrant workers out to do their weekly shopping and to wire money back to their families via Western Union. And this farm employed a lot of migrant workers. Think of a couple school buses worth. And where was the local Western Union station? Behind our front end. Who was allowed to operate the terminal? Checkout coaches and managers. How long does it take to send one person's money? About 5 minutes. And I knew, because I knew the farmer, that he chose Saturday because that's usually when the Western Union terminal is free. He usually came around 9 o'clock or so. So I act all meek and mild and go outside to do garbage. I do the corrals first and then take them in and pile them up outside the compactor. The corrals cans were always disgusting. People put everything in those cans. As I'm going outside for the cans nearest the entrance, I see the farmer's bus pull into the lot. I counted as 32 workers get off the bus and walk into the store. I looked at my watch, and this is before cell phones, kiddos, and it is 9:15. Perfect. I take my sweet time doing the garbage by the entrance, and even got the one in front of Blockbuster just to use up more time, dragging my feet all the while. By now, it's 9:40. I take a load in. Mel is hard at work at the Western Union computer, wiring money. I'll say this for her, she worked hard. But it was bittersweet because these workers haven't been around women much, and even though they're speaking Spanish, they're talking to her and hitting on her. Mel, who is Hispanic but doesn't look it, understands every word. I'm sure it pained her little black heart to smile as each aggressively descriptive worker tried hitting on her or talking to her. I take the garbage back, piling up the bags in front of the chute. The pile is now waist high, and it reeks. It's August, remember? Back to the gas station. I take my sweet time and get all of the gas station bags and the bag in the hut in 2 trips. This takes another 45 minutes, mainly due to the slow butt walk back. Each time I make sure to just breeze back to the compactor, piling the bags and heading back outside. I made sure one bag ripped, so I had to stop and put that bag in another bag. Hey, we don't want to leave a mess now, do we? And then take it back inside. I drop off the U-boat and clean it off. We had to hose it down, otherwise the smell would be, worse. We usually clean it off with a hose and some disinfectant. So I made sure that the U-boat was really clean. I spent 10 minutes hosing it down and getting it nice and purty. It is now 10:40, 5 minutes before I have to punch out. I walk very slowly up to the front end. Mel has gotten through about half of the migrant workers. The migrant workers are just shooting the bull and having a good time, not working and flirting with the cashier. Most of them went back to the bus to wait. I know some of them were not legal. I said, "Mel, the garbage, it's all done." She said, "What? Oh, good. Did you throw it down the chute?" "Nope, you told me to come find you so you could compact it." Just go back there and throw it in the chute. I'm busy." "Sorry, Mel, no can do." "What do you mean? Austin, go throw the dang garbage in the chute." "I can't. I need to leave." I swear she turned tomato red. You can't leave. Go throw the garbage away and do it now. I'm writing you up for insubordination." "Does that mean I get overtime pay?" "What? No. Why would you get overtime?" "Because I need to punch out in about a minute or I'll be over my hours and you'll have to explain to the GM why I have to get overtime pay." "Your what?" I explained quickly that I was already at my max hours for the week. The morning FEM, front end manager, had cleared this with the GM that I punch out at 10:45 p.m. and had written it down on the schedule. All the while, the checkout coach is trying to ring up some of the migrant workers and the cashier is signaling that she needs a manager's help. Mel looked like she was going to have a conniption, but she can't because my butt is covered. I punched out, grabbed my keys from my locker, and headed out the door. The cherry on top? I found out later that Mel had to throw the garbage out herself after it had sat in the back for several hours and blocked the door, meaning that she had to move each bag at least twice. Because the bags weren't the greatest quality, many of them ripped, spilling foul-smelling garbage everywhere, forcing her to then clean the floor. Food was stored there short-term before it was moved to the shelves. Since she was always a sharp dresser, I have no doubt she had to go get some clothes professionally laundered, if not just throw it out. It was almost 1 when she was able to leave, from what I heard. Even suckier for her, she was salaried, so it didn't matter how many hours she worked. She didn't get paid anymore. I wish I could say this stopped her being a royal witch, but it didn't. She couldn't say anything to me though, because I was just making sure that I didn't waste any more time and kept busy.